Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at something that honestly sounds like science fiction, but it is entirely historical fact. We're going to examine how a modern-style corporate takeover happened on a continental scale hundreds of years ago. We're talking about the East India Company, a group of businessmen who literally managed to swallow an entire subcontinent.
Now, I want you to just pause for a second and ponder this incredible paradox. How does a single company conquer a continent? I mean, how do you take over a massive, incredibly wealthy empire without fighting everyone at once? It seems completely impossible for a private business to pull this off. But as we'll see, they use tactics that look surprisingly like ruthless corporate strategies we'd recognize today.
We're tracking a 250-year journey here. It starts in 1600 with a simple trade charter signed in London, hits a massive turning point with the Battle of Plassey in 1757, erupts into the Sepoy Rebellion in 1857, and then ends in 1858 with direct crown rule. We're going to walk through exactly how a small group of merchants slowly transformed into an unstoppable empire.
Section 1. The Merchant Monopoly. The pitch. Becoming tenants.
So, we begin in the year 1600. Queen Elizabeth I signed a royal charter granting a group of London merchants a total monopoly to trade in the East Indies. But at first they weren't conquerors at all. They were just businessmen after spices, cotton, and silk. They traveled to India, where the incredibly powerful Mughal Empire was at its absolute peak. The British simply asked for permission to trade, and the Mughal emperor agreed, for a price, of course. So the company built trading posts, which they called factories, in Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta. For a century and a half, they were just tenants on Indian soil. They paid their rent, traded their goods, and just kind of stayed out of the way. But as the Mughal Empire eventually began to crumble and local kings started fighting for control, well, these tenants saw a massive opportunity.
Section 2. The Hostile Takeover. From Traders to Tax Collectors.
The real inciting incident for this hostile takeover was the 1757 Battle of Plassey. The Nawab of Bengal didn't trust the British, so he attacked their base in Calcutta. A British officer named Robert Clive sailed to fight him, but the British faced literally impossible odds. Clive had a mere 3,000 men. The Nawab's army? 50,000 men. A head-on fight would have been absolute corporate suicide.
So here's the crucial point. The British didn't win through military brilliance. No, they won with a massive, targeted corporate bribe. Clive found a traitor in the Nawab's ranks, a general named Mir Jafar. Clive simply paid Mir Jafar to keep his troops out of the fight and do absolutely nothing.
Here's how this takeover unfolded, step by step. Because Mir Jafar stood down, the battle lasted a mere 11 hours. The Nawab fled and was killed. The company then installed Mir Jafar on the throne as a puppet ruler. And in exchange for the crown, the East India Company took total control of Bengal's tax revenues. Almost overnight, they rapidly built from a single battle into acquiring the largest private army in Asia, entirely funded using local Indian tax money. Now, with an army secured, the corporation shifted its strategy to something even more insidious.
Section 3. Weaponizing the Fine Print. The Bureaucracy of Empire.
So, how do you take over a whole continent? Well, you invent the Subsidiary alliance. Governor-General Lord Wellesley pitched this trap to Indian kings as a friendly alliance. The pitch was simple: sign this treaty, and I will protect you from your enemies. But in reality, it was essentially a hostile corporate restructuring of the Indian subcontinent. The deadly fine print of this treaty was a total trap. If a king signed, he couldn't have any foreign relations, he couldn't hire any other European staff, and worst of all, he had to house and pay for a permanent British army right on his own land. This gave kings the illusion of choice. If they couldn't afford to pay the corporate protection fee, the British took their land. If they refused to sign the treaty in the first place, the British labeled them an enemy and took their land anyway. State by state, the map turned red.
And if the Subsidiary alliance wasn't enough, Lord Dalhousie introduced an aggressive new policy called the Doctrine of Lapse. Now, traditional Hindu law had always allowed a king to adopt a son if he had no biological heir. Dalhousie completely invalidated these traditional laws of adoption just to snatch up more territory. He declared that if a ruler died without a natural-born son, the kingdom simply lapsed into British property.
This wasn't just abstract policy, though. It ruined lives. This specific insult to the Queen of Jhansi, Rani Lakshmibai, shows exactly how Nawabs and Maharajas were systematically pushed aside. She was told her adopted son could not be king, and she was ordered to leave her palace with a mere 150 rupee monthly pension. Entire lineages were just erased by the stroke of a pen.
Section 4.
The inevitable explosion. The 1857 rebellion.
By 1856, the East India Company controlled almost the entire continent, pushing the Indian people to their absolute breaking point. The final straw was a profound act of cultural ignorance: a bullet. The new Enfield rifle required soldiers to bite off the end of a greased cartridge. The rumor spread like wildfire that this grease was made of cow fat and pig fat. To a Hindu, the cow is sacred. To a Muslim, the pig is unclean. So the corporation managed to deeply violate the beliefs of both major religious demographics simultaneously.
In May 1857, the employees literally mutinied against the corporation. The Indian soldiers, called sepoys, rose up. They marched to Delhi and declared the old Mughal emperor their leader. What followed was a horrifically bloody conflict lasting an entire year where both sides committed terrible atrocities and massacres.
Now, it's really important to note how history remembers this event, because it depends heavily on who is telling the story. To the British, it was viewed as an illegal uprising, known as the Sepoy Mutiny. But to Indian historians, this was a massive pushback for freedom, remembered as the First War of Independence.
Section 5. The Crown's Jewel. Bailout and Nationalization.
The sheer bloodshed of the rebellion severely shocked London, and the British government realized that a private business simply could not handle an empire of this magnitude. So, in 1858, Parliament stepped in. They passed the Government of India Act, which officially and permanently dissolved the East India Company.
This shift in power was absolute. The company flag was literally replaced by the Union Jack. We moved from the corporate era, ruled by a governor-general, to the British Raj, ruled directly by Queen Victoria as Empress and her appointed viceroy. The power shifted entirely from corporate executives in London boardrooms to the direct royal authority of the British Crown. But for the people of India, the exploitation simply became official government policy. Under the Raj, India became the jewel in the crown. The crown oversaw a massive drain of Indian wealth to Britain, the intentional destruction of local Indian industries, and they continued to use Indian soldiers to conquer other parts of Asia and Africa. India was essentially turned into a massive engine for global British expansion.
So, the crucial and tragic secret of colonialism is this: the British never conquered India alone. This entire empire was built over 300 years, but it was largely executed using Indian generals, Indian tax collectors, and Indian soldiers against local people.
It all started with a simple signature on a piece of paper for a trade monopoly. As we wrap up our explainer of history's most ruthless corporate takeover, I leave you with this final thought to ponder. Was the East India Company a business or a monster? Thank you for exploring this with me, and keep questioning the history behind the world we live in today.